The story begins at Liang City Number 1 High School, where one of the instructors standing on the stage declared that he believed and trusted the students already knew that only by entering the Hongji class would they have any hope of becoming elite martial artists in the future. He explained that the placement exam simulated the college entrance examination, consisting of a written academic test and a martial arts assessment. The total score was 750 points, with the academic subjects accounting for 225 points and the martial arts exam making up 525 points. The instructor urged the students to apply everything they had learned and answer carefully if they wished to pass, then added in a serious tone that only the top 10 students in total score would be admitted into the Hongji class. With that, he announced that the academic exam would begin shortly, and instructed everyone to enter the examination hall in an orderly manner. After a short while, the protagonist thought to himself that this was the long-awaited opportunity he had been waiting for to become a true martial artist, and his name was Chen Du. In his mind, Chen Du recalled how he had suddenly fallen into a coma during his first year of high school, and how his parents, deeply worried for him, had applied for 2 years of medical leave on his behalf. This made the current exam likely his last chance to walk the path of a martial artist, and he knew he had to seize it no matter what. However, as he walked down the school corridor, he was suddenly bumped into by a man who laughed and mockingly asked if the person in front of him wasn't Chen Du, then questioned whether Chen Du had really come to their school to take the exam. The man jokingly said that, just as he had told his friends earlier, anyone could take the test to enter the Hongji class, even someone like Chen Du, who had taken 2 years of leave while still only in his first year, yet still dared to attempt the exam. As the man slowly reached out toward Chen Du's shoulder, his expression darkened as he remarked that young people really had nerve, saying that Chen Du got sick, took 2 years off, and yet dared to directly aim for the Hongji class, asking whether Chen Du actually thought he was some kind of genius. Before he could place his hand on Chen Du's shoulder, Chen Du suddenly grabbed the man's wrist tightly and calmly thanked him for his concern, telling him instead to focus on how he planned to pass the upcoming exam. After that, Chen Du turned around and walked away. As he left, one of the men commented that Chen Du was obviously someone who had been bullied back in his first year and wondered why he was acting so arrogant now, then suggested to the black-haired man that they teach Chen Du a lesson after the exam. The black-haired man remained silent, questioning to himself why Chen Du's grip strength felt far stronger than expected. When Chen Du took his seat, another man scolded his companion for lacking brains, saying that if they caused trouble now and got caught, they would likely be disqualified, so it would be better to wait until after the exam to do whatever they wanted. The man replied that if Chen Du were to be accidentally crippled during the exam, no one would be able to say a thing. Meanwhile, after sitting down in front of the computer, Chen Du quickly read through the exam questions in his mind, the first of which instructed him to briefly describe the current world background and the initial day of the High Martial Calendar, starting with common knowledge questions. Chen Du began answering, writing that in Old Era year 2842, an otherworldly civilization discovered Earth and launched an invasion. Humanity retaliated with nuclear weapons, but after 2 years of war, both humanity and its nuclear arsenal were completely defeated by the invaders, with the death toll exceeding 5 billion people worldwide. Under the effects of global nuclear radiation, humans broke through their physical limiters and began to evolve, and on August 27 of Old Era year 2860, the life intensity of all adults reached level 2. That day marked the end of the Old Era and the beginning of the New Era, known as the initial day of the High Martial Calendar. After answering the remaining questions, Chen Du submitted his exam, receiving full marks just as he had expected. He then explained that he had not actually been in a coma for 2 years. Instead, due to an inexplicable injury, he had repeatedly entered a strange space, and the rewards he obtained there helped him awaken his mental power, granting him a photographic memory. That was precisely why, despite being suspended from school for 2 years, he still had the confidence to register for the exam. Unfortunately, even a perfect academic score only amounted to 225 points, so he still needed to go home and properly prepare for the martial arts assessment. After returning home, he greeted his father, who was preparing dinner, and as Chen Du walked toward him, his exam admission ticket fell from his pocket. His younger sister quickly picked it up, scolding him for being clumsy, and reminding him to make sure he didn't lose such an important item. Once they sat down at the table to eat, Chen Du's father suddenly took out a bottle of pills, prompting Chen Du to ask in surprise whether it was qi blood powder and where his father had gotten it. Smiling, his father explained that since Chen Du was currently taking the Hongji class exam, he had bought some qi blood powder to help boost his score, placing a slice of meat onto Chen Du's plate as he spoke. Chen Du responded with a sad expression, telling his father that he could actually pass the exam even without something like qi blood powder. Still smiling, his father told him not to waste time overthinking things, adding that even if he himself couldn't become a martial artist, their family could more than afford to support a few martial artists, whether it was Chen Du or his sister. He went on to say that Chengdu should eat what needed to be eaten and drink what needed to be drunk, because there would always be a way for him to earn money for the family. Chengdu could only smile and nod in response. Later that night, alone in his room, Chengdu thought about how a single bottle of chi blood powder cost 20,000, and that buying it had probably drained most of the family's savings. He also reflected that in today's society, anyone who couldn't become a martial artist couldn't even guarantee their family's safety. As he began his cultivation training, Chengdu knew that whether tomorrow's exam went smoothly depended entirely on tonight's efforts. As he gathered his energy, he was instantly teleported into a mysterious space, his sword appearing beside him. When Chengdu grasped his sword, countless monsters emerged behind him. He explained that since his coma, he entered this crystal space every night after falling asleep, that countless monsters existed there with the goal of destroying the crystal, and that he had to fight them to protect it. If the crystal was destroyed, he would fall into a coma for the entire next day. But if he died in battle while defending it, he would wake up quickly and feel full of energy throughout the day. Chengdu recalled that at first he had been afraid to risk his life, which caused him to repeatedly fall into comas, and things only improved after he discovered the rule that dying brought abundant energy. He also noted that there were benefits, as each successful defense against a wave of monsters slightly increased his mental power, making his memory and comprehension absurdly strong. Even after being out of school for 2 years, he continued to gain knowledge and strength through battles within the space. After killing all the monsters, Chengdu opened his system panel, and upon seeing his current status, he realized that his stats were probably still not enough to enter the Hongjai class and become an elite martial artist in the future. Because of that, he did not stop fighting. When the system notification announced the 5th wave, a massive and ferocious red dragon appeared, immediately breathing fire toward him. Chengdu easily dodged the attack and charged forward, leaping onto the dragon's arm, only for the dragon to counterattack with its tail. Using the force of that strike, Chengdu propelled himself even higher, blue energy enveloping his body, as he realized that after experiencing countless deaths, he had finally mastered the dragon's attack patterns and rhythm. Activating his technique, flowing light sword art breeze in the forest, he unleashed a powerful strike that slammed the dragon to the ground. However, Chengdu also suffered minor injuries in the exchange, and to his shock, as he stood atop the dragon's body, he noticed it suddenly went berserk and immediately launched another attack. Seeing this, Chengdu leapt backward to evade, calming himself as he thought that this time he could definitely defeat the red dragon. After narrowly avoiding the dragon's attack, Chengdu spun around and leapt onto the dragon's shoulder to launch another strike. Just as he was about to attack the dragon's mouth, the red dragon suddenly countered, immediately unleashing a burst of fire breath toward him. However, before the flames could fully engulf Chengdu, he evaded by jumping and hiding behind the massive arms of the red dragon. At that moment, Chengdu realized that his smaller body compared to his opponent actually gave him an advantage, especially in terms of agility. Standing atop one of the red dragon's arms, Chengdu hurled his sword straight toward its eye, instantly dealing damage. After retrieving his sword, Chengdu gathered his strength and released a powerful blue surge of energy in a single strike, piercing straight through the red dragon's neck. As the dragon crashed heavily to the ground, Chengdu continued launching consecutive attacks to ensure his opponent was truly dead, until a system notification appeared, congratulating him for successfully defending against 5 waves of monster attacks. Along with it, he received a reward of +1 level to his mental power. In addition to that, Chengdu also obtained a technique called the Void Immortal Visualization Method, leaving him completely stunned. He had only expected an increase in mental power, yet he had received an entire visualization method as well. Chengdu immediately recalled that the school once explained that visualization methods were extremely rare techniques that allowed one to actively cultivate mental power. He also thought to himself that although he could raise his mental power level through system rewards, the more techniques and advantages he gained, the better it would be for him. The system then prompted him to prepare, as the next wave of monsters was approaching. When Chengdu turned around, his eyes widened in shock as he saw countless gigantic monsters with glowing red eyes emerging behind him. A short while later, after Chengdu returned to his room, he realized that their life intensity was 1 level higher than his, and there were around 30 of them, making it clear that he wouldn't be able to clear that stage anytime soon. He decided it would be better to first examine the visualization method, but the moment he opened the book, he was immediately transported into another space. Chengdu was utterly shocked when he saw a colossal and terrifying being standing before him, and as fear nearly overwhelmed him, he realized that this was how the technique worked. He could no longer wonder why it was called a visualization method, because as long as he gazed upon the giant, he would be subjected to a trial. After an entire night of cultivation and training within the crystal space, Chengdu's sister suddenly opened the door to his room, telling him it was time to eat breakfast. Chengdu immediately stood up to get dressed, and he couldn't help but smile when his sister remarked that he looked a bit more handsome now. He reached out and rubbed her head, asking whether her brother hadn't been handsome before, causing her face to turn red as she muttered to herself, wondering if her brother had really been that good-looking in the past. When Chengdu looked into the mirror, he also noticed subtle changes in his body and face, prompting him to wonder if this was the effect of the Void Immortal visualization method. Shortly after, he informed his father that he was heading to school to continue the assessment. Not long after, inside the gymnasium of Liang City No. 1 High School, Chengdu thought that the Void Immortal visualization method was indeed very effective, as he could clearly feel improvements in every aspect of his body. Suddenly, he heard a voice from behind asking whether the genius student Chengdu, who had been suspended for 2 years, was standing in front of them. The source of the voice was none other than a group of arrogant male students, who mocked him by saying that the dead last before suspension still dared to come back after 2 years to take the Hongji class assessment, asking whether the great philanthropist was here to secure the bottom rank. Chengdu calmly replied that he was at least better than someone who couldn't even pass the academic exams. This instantly enraged them, prompting them to demand that he repeat what he said, but Chengdu merely smiled and remarked that if they couldn't even hear him clearly, then they weren't qualified to participate in the exam. Veins immediately bulged on one man's face as he warned Chengdu not to push his luck, only for Chengdu to respond that he hadn't mentioned any names, so they shouldn't take it personally if the words didn't apply to them. At that moment, another student stepped in to mediate, telling them to stop for now and focus on the assessment, warning that if a teacher showed up, their losses would far outweigh any gains. The arrogant students walked away, but before leaving, one of them turned back and told Chengdu to just wait, vowing to make him regret his arrogance. Chengdu's friend immediately grew anxious and said this was the end for him, but Chengdu simply replied that there was no problem because he would deal with whatever came his way. His friend insisted that this wasn't something that could be handled so casually, adding that Chengdu must not know the situation since he had been suspended for 2 years. He then explained that the arrogant man was Feng Roe, who acted so boldly because his second uncle was now the school's dean of students, and it was rumored that the dean had already leaked the martial arts assessment questions to Feng Roe. Chengdu immediately realized that he would need to watch out for Feng Roe conspiring with the teachers to sabotage him. Not long after, the students were informed that the martial arts assessment would be divided into a strength test and a combat duel, and they were instructed to form groups of 10 according to their exam numbers, enter their respective exam areas, and prioritize the strength test. While standing in line with his friend, Chengdu said that since the exam was about to start, there was no point in overthinking things, causing his friend to comment that Chengdu was far too carefree. A short while later, his friend explained that they needed to strike the sandbag simultaneously, and that the lowest-ranked student in each group would be eliminated immediately, complaining that this year's strength test rules were extremely harsh. In Chengdu's mind, however, the combat duel was what truly mattered, so he decided to conserve his strength appropriately. As he gathered power into his fist, he chose to rely on speed rather than brute force to win this round. At the same time, Feng Rui was also taking the test, gathering the full strength of his body while boasting that it was just a piece of cake and that he had plenty of power to spare. When the first group's assessment began, Feng Rui and Chengdu launched their attacks at the same time, and the thunderous impact echoed throughout the entire exam hall. Feng Rui's followers immediately cheered, praising their boss's overwhelming strength, while others stared in shock, saying that Feng Rui truly lived up to expectations. Some even claimed that they heard his punch reach nearly 1,400 jin, and one of Feng Rui's lackeys proudly announced that their boss had taken first place, adding after a glance at Chengdu that he would probably be eliminated this round. However, sweat suddenly streamed down his face when he saw the result of Chengdu's punch. Everyone was left in disbelief as the massive heavy sandbag Chengdu struck was sent flying and shattered into pieces, prompting students to question what had just happened and whether Chengdu's punch had reached 1,500 jin. Others immediately began asking which class Chengdu was from, whether he was really that impressive, and why his name hadn't even appeared in the top 50 rankings last year. Even Feng Rui himself turned to look at Chengdu in shock. Chengdu's friend was overjoyed, praising him enthusiastically, even though he hadn't known Chengdu was this strong, saying that just as he expected, Chengdu was truly amazing, while inwardly cursing to himself and wondering when Chengdu had become so terrifyingly powerful. An instructor immediately fell into deep thought after witnessing what had just happened. According to his understanding, a life intensity of level 5.1 corresponded to a punching force of around 1,000 jin, yet Chengdu had clearly unleashed a strike close to 1,500 jin. The instructor couldn't help but think that no one in the Hongxi class should be capable of such a feat, which led him to question whether there was truly such a formidable student hidden within the school's regular classes. Without hesitation, he asked his secretary to bring him Chengdu's file. After reading through it, the instructor was shocked to discover that this student, who came from a regular class and had taken a 2-year suspension, had already reached Tier 1 and achieved a 55% mastery in martial skills. He immediately sensed that Chengdu's true martial efficiency was very likely far above 55%. As the instructor continued to observe Chengdu, He made up his mind that today, he would focus closely on this student in order to uncover the real strength Chengdu was concealing. By afternoon, when the combat duel portion of the assessment began, the instructor announced that the students whose names were called should step onto the stage. The very first match he announced was none other than Chengdu versus Feng Rui. Instantly, murmurs spread throughout the crowd. Some students whispered that although Chengdu had only just returned to school, his strength score was terrifyingly impressive, making them wonder if he could actually defeat Feng Rui. Others questioned how such a thing was even possible, firmly believing that Feng Rui would definitely win. They argued that real combat relied on martial skills, and that raw strength alone did not provide much of an advantage. After stepping onto the stage, Feng Rui sneered at Chengdu and told him not to think he would be lucky again just because he had beaten him once before. Chengdu simply smiled and replied that he hoped Feng Rui would still be able to remain this arrogant after the fight. Feng Rui immediately leapt forward and launched an attack, using his martial technique, Stop War. However, Chengdu calmly dodged and deflected every strike with ease. After blocking one of Feng Rui's attacks, Feng Rui was suddenly forced back by the sheer force behind Chengdu's defense. Seizing the opportunity, Chengdu counterattacked, instantly causing Feng Rui's nose to bleed. Feng Rui dropped to one knee, his expression darkening as he thought that the one who would enter the Hongji class had to be him. As he stood back up, he gathered his strength into his weapon and unleashed a storm of rapid consecutive attacks at Chengdu. Chengdu responded by blocking each strike, focusing entirely on defense. Seeing this, Feng Rui believed that Chengdu could only defend, so he poured all his power into a crushing attack meant to knock him down. Chengdu was unable to completely avoid it and suffered a hit, leaving his face slightly scraped and injured. At that moment, Chengdu realized that actual combat against people was indeed different from fighting monsters in the crystal space. While he was still thinking, Feng Rui once again gathered his power for another attack. This time, when Feng Rui struck, Chengdu met the attack head-on with his own. After their forces collided, Feng Rui was startled, and the moment his weapon slipped from his grasp, Chengdu unleashed a relentless series of attacks. Feng Rui vomited blood under the ferocity of Chengdu's assault. Desperate upon seeing Chengdu closing in, Feng Rui pulled out a hidden dagger from behind him and attempted to kill Chengdu. However, before the blade could reach him, Chengdu struck Feng Rui's face first. The power behind the blow knocked out Feng Rui's teeth, and he immediately lost consciousness, collapsing onto the stage. The students were left in disbelief that Chengdu had defeated Feng Rui. Some cursed under their breath, while others questioned whether Chengdu had taken illegal drugs to suddenly become so strong. Meanwhile, the instructor quickly ordered the school's medical team to examine Feng Rui's condition and instructed the other students to prepare for the next match. As Chengdu stepped down from the stage, someone called out his name. Turning around, he saw the instructor from the school. Chengdu addressed him as Teacher Ling and explained that he had been anxious earlier and failed to control his strength properly, immediately apologizing for what had happened to Feng Rui. Teacher Ling placed a hand on Chengdu's shoulder and smiled, saying that injuries during combat duels were normal and that Chengdu simply needed to pay more attention next time. He also praised Chengdu for his hard work today and reminded him to stretch properly when he got home. Chengdu quickly thanked the instructor. As Chengdu walked away, Teacher Ling immediately called the principal, Wang Sei. Watching Chengdu's retreating figure, Teacher Ling thought to himself that Feng Rui had been beaten so badly, yet Chengdu had not received a single serious injury, and the most likely reason was the overwhelming superiority of Chengdu's martial skills. Meanwhile, as Chengdu walked through one of the school corridors, he felt it was still too early to go home, and his father and sister would probably return late anyway. He decided to head to a virtual combat capsule instead. Although he couldn't afford a real one-on-one sparring partner, the school had distributed a virtual combat capsule to every student. Chengdu recalled that once a student lay inside the capsule, they could be matched with martial artists of similar levels for combat. Since he had mostly been fighting monsters in the crystal space, he hadn't really used the virtual combat system before, which left his current rank at bronze. After plugging in the virtual combat capsule, Chengdu thought about how Feng Rui had lost so miserably today, and would likely try to cause trouble so Chengdu wouldn't be able to enter the Hongzi class. When the capsule activated, it was explained that combat records from the virtual capsule were logged into the Blue Star Youth List, a ranking system specifically established for the college entrance exam and widely regarded as the Genius List. The Blue Star Youth List was a global ranking of martial strength recognized across all ecospheres, and even within the Hongzi class, no one had managed to make it onto the list. Sitting inside the capsule, Chengdu realized that as long as he could obtain a ranking on the Blue Star Youth List, he would definitely earn the opportunity to enter the Hongzi class based on strength alone. As the capsule closed, Chengdu was transported into a virtual space, where he found himself wearing a pink Piff mascot head. While searching for an opponent, Chengdu thought that since obtaining the crystal space, he hadn't really used the virtual combat system at all, so it would be better to start with a warm-up match. After selecting an opponent, he was instantly transported into an arena within the virtual space. However, Chengdu was surprised to find that he couldn't see his opponent anywhere. Suddenly a woman charged at him from behind and mocked him, saying that his reaction speed was far too slow. However, Chengdu easily blocked the attack from the purple-haired woman. Because of this, she immediately praised him, saying that his reaction speed was decent. She then told Chengdu that this wasn't a school exam, so there was no need to wait until he could clearly see his opponent or politely greet them before fighting. Hearing this, Chengdu instantly prepared to counterattack, saying that he had learned his lesson from her, but he wouldn't give her another chance to launch a sneak attack. Chengdu then launched a series of attacks toward the purple-haired woman, but every single strike was effortlessly dodged. When Chengdu used his pale dragon point thrust, the woman was visibly shocked and immediately asked whether what he had just used was truly the pale dragon point thrust. According to her, his move was clearly a thrust, yet he had applied it like a sword slash. She retaliated with a kick and told Chengdu that the application of the flowing light foreforms should never be constrained to a specific shape or method, urging him to think more deeply about the martial art itself. Chengdu immediately realized that she was right and asked himself why sword techniques had to be limited by rigid forms. However, what troubled him even more was how the woman had recognized his sword skill so easily. As Chengdu thought about how overwhelmingly strong his opponent was, he couldn't even tell what kind of foundational martial arts she practiced. At that moment, the woman launched another attack at him, reminding him not to get distracted so easily. As the battle continued, Chengdu couldn't help but question who this woman really was. Because he was lost in thought, he was struck again by her attack, and she criticized him for being too careless. Chengdu cursed under his breath and realized that his opponent clearly favored attacking from behind. After the fight ended, Chengdu reflected that he could have won through sheer brute force. But his opponent had insisted on relying on sneak attacks. He then recalled what she had told him earlier, that he should think more about the martial art itself. He also remembered that the flowing light sword art consisted of 4 forms, and that the pale dragon point thrust was the only one he had yet to truly master. Suddenly, he realized that as a thrust-based technique, its attributes were actually closer to those of an assassin, a class known for sneak attacks. However, his own fighting style had always been too straightforward. Deciding to test this line of thought through actual combat, Chengdu searched for another opponent. He quickly thought that earlier he had faced a woman who specialized in sneak attacks, but now he had encountered someone with a weapon countering style. This made him wonder just what kind of god-tier matchmaking system the virtual combat capsule was using. Even though his new opponent was massive and wielded an equally huge weapon, Chengdu charged forward without hesitation, thinking that his martial skill level was higher, giving him the advantage. He immediately launched an attack using his painting the ground as a prison technique, quickly following it up with golden drums ringing to the heavens, causing his opponent to vomit. The giant man flew into a rage, shouting that a sword should not be used the way Chengdu was using it, and warned him not to think that being slightly stronger in martial arts meant he could do whatever he wanted. He then launched a fierce attack at Chengdu, but Chengdu's eyes lit up as he used his breeze in the forest technique, redirecting the attack back at the giant. At the same time, Chengdu mimicked the tactics of the woman he had fought earlier and swiftly moved behind the giant, who could only shout in confusion about how Chengdu had suddenly appeared at his back. Chengdu didn't waste any time. Using the pale dragon point thrust, he immediately ended the battle. After the fight, Chengdu realized that this was the first time he had successfully unleashed the pale dragon point thrust. He couldn't help but ask himself why the sword was considered a skillful weapon. To Chengdu, skillful didn't mean dexterous, but ever-changing. It could be hard or soft, hidden or exposed, move like thunder, or flow endlessly like a gentle stream. As the final form of the flowing light sword art, the pale dragon point thrust was likely meant to teach him that the sword could be wielded openly and honorably, yet also used in secrecy. Smiling as he looked at his sword, Chengdu thought that the sword was ultimately an undefined weapon. At that moment he received a system notification stating that his flowing light sword art had improved from Tier 1 at 89% to Tier 1 at 90%. Because of his continuous battles in the virtual space, Chengdu kept receiving notifications about the improvement of his flowing light sword art. After fighting for a long time, Chengdu felt intense hunger. However, before he could even stand up from his seat, he received a notification and congratulations on his smartwatch, informing him that he had entered the top 10,000 of the Blue Star Youth list. Chengdu could hardly believe it, so he immediately instructed the system to display his full ranking details. According to the system, Chengdu was currently ranked 6,219 on the Blue Star Youth list, 654th on the 7th Biosphere Youth list, 55th in the Giant Bear Realm Youth list, 7th in the Purple Cloud District Youth list, and 1st in the Liang City Youth list. Overwhelmed with joy, Chengdu never expected that after mastering the Pale Dragon Point thrust this time, he would actually become number 1 on the Liang City Youth list. With this achievement, Chengdu was confident that his place in the Hongji class was already secured. The next day at Liang City No. 1 High School, while Chengdu was walking through the campus, someone suddenly called out his name. It was Feng Liguo, the dean of students of number 1 high school, and Feng Rui's second uncle. Feng Liguo scolded Chengdu for not greeting a teacher, and questioned where his manners were. Chengdu nearly froze in shock when he saw the man, silently wondering who this short, balding figure was, and what the armband he was wearing even meant. Feng Liguo walked closer, pointing at Chengdu as he introduced himself as the dean of students. He said that as dean he was conducting a uniform inspection, and demanded to know what Chengdu was wearing. Chengdu casually replied that he was wearing the school uniform, which caused several students to burst out laughing. Other students whispered that Chengdu was definitely going to be in trouble, since Feng Rui had not yet been discharged from the hospital, and his second uncle was sure to take revenge. There were also rumors spreading that Chengdu had only won because he had taken banned drugs before the exam, and that he deserved punishment from the dean. Others questioned whether that was really true, believing instead that Chengdu had won because he was genuinely powerful. Suddenly the dean struck Chengdu with a baton, claiming that his attire did not comply with school regulations. Even though Chengdu was already irritated by the short, bald dean, he calmly said that all his clothes complied with school rules and asked Dean Feng Liguo which part was non-compliant. This response only made the dean angrier, and he struck Chengdu again. When Chengdu caught the baton, Dean Feng shouted that Chengdu was disobeying discipline and contradicting a teacher, and that he would report him to the principal to have him expelled. Just then, a voice asked who was looking for him. It was none other than Li Mu, the principal of number 1 high school, accompanied by Wang Anchan, the mayor of Liang City. Dean Feng immediately rushed over, trying to report Chengdu, but the principal silenced him and asked if the student in front of him was Chengdu. After Chengdu confirmed it with a confused expression, the principal and mayor walked toward him. The principal said that they had come specifically to see Chengdu. After introducing the mayor, Chengdu politely greeted him and asked about their purpose. The mayor then said that Chengdu had just become number 1 on the Liang City youth list, and had also entered the top 10,000 of the Blue Star youth list, so as the city mayor he had to personally see what kind of extraordinary figure Chengdu really was. The surrounding students were left in utter disbelief, while the bald dean stood frozen, questioning whether Chengdu had truly entered the top 10,000 of the Blue Star youth list.